So let's look at the cost of long-term care. I just put it all up there at one time. For in-home care, the average cost, these are national numbers. The average cost is over $45,000 a year. That was as of 2014. That's based on $20 an hour for 44 hours a week. I know because I was looking at it for my mother. You may have a number. You may have a number that's $21, $20, $21, $22 an hour. But that's not even 24-hour care. That's just part-time, 44 hours out of a week. Adult daycare, almost $17,000 on 5 days a week basis. Nursing home was $87,600 per year in 2014. That's a national average. We know that it goes up 6% per year. If you do that with this number, it's actually about $96,000 per year, which is about $8,000 per month. That's the average. Could be less. It could be $5,500. If you're in assisted living, it could be $3,600. If you're in the memory unit or the veterans retirement home, it could be $10,000 a year is $120,000. I'm sorry, $10,000 a month is $120,000 a year. Let's use these numbers for the next slide right here. $7,300 per month. For women, for their need for their lifetime, on average, 70% of you, $219,000 average. And for men needing long-term care for a year and a half, it's $131,400. What's that? That's a train wreck. Do you consider $219,000 or $131,000 for women and men, or even combined if you have two spouses who go in? Do you consider that to be catastrophic costs?
Yeah.
Those are staggering numbers. And most people aren't prepared for it. Most people aren't prepared for it because either they bought what they were told and they followed the ethic of working and saving a little bit for themselves and they were going to take care of themselves. Maybe they couldn't qualify for insurance. Maybe they didn't take the time to qualify for insurance. Or maybe they did and the company went out of business. There's all kinds of reasons why people aren't prepared. A lot of times it's just procrastination. But that's just the way life is. But I would suggest that most people would say, when I got up there, are you prepared? And it says most say blank. I would suggest that most people would say no. They're not prepared for that. And maybe it's too late to do something by way of insurance. Maybe it's not. But if we don't do anything, I asked you earlier, I said, did you bring your crystal ball? There's one thing for sure that's going to happen. If you don't do anything and you have assets that you want to protect and you don't do anything, there's one thing for sure is going to happen we can predict with 100% certainty. If you need long-term care, you're going to be facing catastrophic costs, and that could potentially wipe your family out. That is for certain if you don't do anything. And when we go back to, I'm not sure what my program is doing here. When we go back to this question, now the question is, why are you considering assistance through Medicaid? If you are, why are you considering to cover long-term costs? You see, I can't answer that question. You can answer that question. When you answer that question, we can talk about the rest of it, the what's in the house. It might be that you want to provide for a better quality of care when you're in long-term care facility. That might be an important one. It might be that you want to provide for your spouse who will not need long-term care and be at home. It might be that you want to pass something on to the next generation. I don't know. It might be to protect your assets from creditors or to protect your assets from the state making a claim, an estate recovery claim when you pass away. A lot of folks, and there's going to be something I'll read to you in a minute, a lot of folks think, well, you're just doing this to pass something down to your kids. I would say to you, based on my experience, most people are looking, number one, for a better quality of care when they're in a facility, if they need it, and to provide for their spouse. Those are two instrumental, very, very high-level concerns, and very legitimate. So, we get into then how one receives benefits from the state. Now, I told you that you're not going to get long-term care coverage from Medicare. That's just not going to be available beyond 100 days. If someone needs long-term care assistance through Title 19, administered by Department of Social Services, then they actually complete an application and they submit that. When folks first go into a facility, oftentimes they're asked to prepare an application to get what's called a resource assessment. They may exceed the limits of what they can have or the income, but they'll be asked to conduct or to request a resource assessment, and the state will do that. And the state will tell the patient and the family, here's how much you have based on what you've disclosed on the application. Here's how much you have to spend down. You have to spend down before you're eligible. This is the application for to request the resource assessment. It's the same application to receive benefits or to be determined eligible. They've combined the applications as one form. Okay? I've told you that this workshop is not to help people, especially impoverished people, to fill out the application. But we do this with our clients if we're engaged to do this planning with them. There's two tests that the state looks at, I told you, for eligibility: income and assets. This is on the financial side. And it says it right there. You can earn no more than $2,205 a month to qualify for benefits through the DSS under Title 19. $2,205 a month. Now, there are ways that that's addressed and adjusted. One of which is if you have a spouse, if you're married. Some folks are widowed or divorced, but if you're married, if you're the one going into the long-term care facility and you make $5,000 a month, well, you're not going to qualify because you make too much. But the state will first look at, well, maybe the other spouse who's still living at home, we call that person the community spouse, needs to have some of your income to meet basic needs. Minimum monthly needs allowance. So some of that $5,000 might be shifted from the state, from you to the spouse. And so you drop your income and it goes to the spouse. That's sometimes, most of the time that is done. The second thing is if you still make more income than you are entitled to make, more than $2,205, there's a very simple solution that's involved, usually using a professional like me, called a qualified income trust. It's known as a Miller Trust, and it's a simple mechanism. It's a step that I don't understand why we have to do it, but the state says we do have to do it. So we set up an income trust where the excess income flows into the trust and then is paid out of the trust to the nursing home to pay for the monthly expense. It's a pass-through. And if there's anything that's accumulated over time, then it ultimately could go back to the state. But it's a very simple fix. So I don't want folks to think, well, I make $6,000, $7,000 a month, so I can't qualify. Don't think about it that way, because we have a couple of options to make that issue go away very quickly. The harder problem is dealing with the asset limits. How much do you have to have or not have in order to qualify for benefits from the state? What's the most you can have if you're going into the state, into a facility? Assets. What have you heard?
2,000.
2,000, exactly. If you're the spouse or the individual going into a nursing home, you can have no more than $2,000 that you own and countable resources. That hasn't changed since Medicaid means testing was put in place. It hasn't gone up with the cost of living. $2,000. And if two spouses are going in at the same time, the most you can have, you'd think, would be $4,000. No, the most you can have is $3,000. So our job is to help identify what we can do to protect something if you have more than that. The state will tell you there are some things you can do. I showed you the brochure. We'll get into that just a little bit. So first we have to disclose all sources of income on the application, and we have to disclose all assets. There's a difference here. As far as the income, it's just the income of the spouse who's going into the nursing home. I'm using nursing home. It could be assisted living, but let's just say nursing home. So you may have income for both spouses, retirement, pensions, Social Security, investment income, things like that. but only the income of the spouse going in is evaluated to determine eligibility. We call that spouse the institutionalized spouse. I hate that term. It sounds like you're going to prison. IS, that's what the state uses. IS, institutionalized spouse. The other spouse, the healthy spouse, is the CS, the community spouse. The IS income is what's looked at not together, not both. That's different on the assets. On the assets, when you make this application for a resource assessment or benefits, they look at the combined resources of both spouses, and it doesn't matter whose name the asset is in. It could be Bob's retirement account, and it could be Mary's retirement account, but the state's going to ask for both. And they start looking at your total asset inventory, and they start then calculating what your accountable resources are together. That's on the date of the original application or original eligibility. It changes in the future, but at least initially, all the assets are looked at together. Now, beyond that, we have to get to exempt assets. Exempt assets. That's the next slide. So step 3 says identify and subtract exempt or protected assets. There are a lot of things that I consider as a planning professional, but I'm going to address the three most common ones. Your home with a certain equity cap. You can have equity in your home of no more than $560,000. Most people are going to fit in there. A primary vehicle, one vehicle, regardless of the value, and your personal furnishings. Personal property, personal assets, things like that. Tangible personal property. Those are the most common ones. There are others, but those are the most common ones. That is going to be deducted. So let's say, I'm going to use the one for a married applicant. Step 1 is identify all your assets, and then you identify your exempt assets. Now you have to put values in here. When you are applying for benefits for the state with that application, it's your responsibility to establish the values. They'll ask you, how'd you get this value? Well, you provide a tax assessment notice on your home. Or you provide, if it's a vehicle, you provide something from Kelly's Blue Book or something like that, NADA. If it's a business interest, you've got, if it's you've got to come up with the values. It can be rather complex, but once you get that done, all the assets less the deductions, and then you get the third line is called total countable assets. The state uses the term resources interchangeably with assets. They say, what are your countable resources? Just think about all your countable assets. So it's all your assets less your exempt assets is what is now available or countable. The community spouse, per the brochure from the state, says you get to keep a certain amount. Not only do you get to stay in the house, you don't have to sell it, but you get to keep a certain amount of countable resources. They say you get to keep 50% of the countable resources, plus the house and the car. But, there's always a but. There's a cap on what you can keep. Okay? So at $250,000, 50% for the healthy spouse is $125,000. That spouse doesn't get to keep $25,000. That spouse gets to keep $120,900. That's the cap. If the countable resources, in addition to the home and the car, are $500,000, investments, retirement, 401ks, IRAs, the healthy spouse doesn't get to keep 50% or $250,000. They only get to keep $120,900. That's it. And so when we take a look at the worksheets and looking at the examples, total assets, exempt assets deducted, countable resources divided by 2, is 50% under or above the cap of $120,000? You just put the number down. No more than $120,900 for the healthy spouse, $2,000 for the institutionalized spouse. Your total protected assets out of what you figured you own, the total protected assets can be no more than $122,900 plus the house and car. Do you think that's a lot to live on for the rest of your life?